Have you ever felt like people are irrationally afraid of herpes? And maybe this was you before you got diagnosed, but now that you've had this for a while or not that long, you're kind of starting to ask yourself, wait, this isn't as big of a deal as I thought it was. Why is everyone so afraid of it? And why does it seem like it's the worst possible thing that anybody could ever encounter? If that is something you've ever thought about, I want to explain in this video exactly why everyone is afraid of herpes, whether that feeling is irrational or rational, and how you can not let the fear hold you back from dating or living your best life. So I first want to touch on origins of the herpes stigma, because when you understand that the herpes stigma and the fear around it is actually incredibly new, you start to realize like maybe it wasn't even something that came along with the virus. Maybe it was manufactured. So going back millions and millions and millions of years ago, there was HSV1 and HSV2. Cavemen had it probably, chimpanzees had it, early humans had it. And you really think they were going around shaming each other, talking about, oh, well, you better disclose your status and don't sleep with Ooga Booga over there because she's got HSV too. No. There just was viruses that were passed from human to human, from skin to skin contact, whether it was sexual, whether it was non-sexual, whether it was wrestling. At the end of the day, human beings, modern human beings, have created a fear, they've created a panic, they've created it basically to be worse than anything out there in the world. And it's interesting when you get to a point where you can zoom out from the stigma, detach from it and say, this is actually a bunch of nonsense. So what actually happened in the 1900s, we'll say in the 1960s, everybody was becoming more liberated, sexually, drug-wise. That sounds weird. Drug-wise? Anyways, thoughts, opening their mind to other ideas, counterculture, that sort of thing. And the people in charge of the world don't want us to be free. They want us to be under control and not thinking for ourselves and just sort of keeping to whatever they believe to be true traditional values. So, there always was a stigma around genitals and sex and having multiple partners, more than 2 in your life. Oh no. And there was obviously shame around gonorrhea, chlamydia, and HIV and all of these things, but there soon became cures for gonorrhea and chlamydia and things like this. So there wasn't really a way to publicly shame someone or shame someone long term. And along comes herpes. Now, before any of these hit pieces we're going to talk about came along, herpes was seen as basically a minor inconvenience. Not something that was even medically documented anywhere. There wasn't really a strict difference between HSV1 or HSV2. They didn't really even categorize them as being different. They were just things that people experienced, skin conditions, viral infections, symptoms that you basically just treated. Wait, there was no treatment back in the day, but I guess treated without antivirals. Not a big deal. And then in the 1980s, Time magazine comes along. Now, Time magazine, that's their YouTube. There was no other information. There was no counter arguments, no independent journalists. It was like you read a magazine and whatever it says in there is true. Okay, cool. Time magazine in 1980 came out with 2 articles. Herpes, the new sexual leprosy, and then herpes, the social scarlet H or something. If you want the full article about these articles, check the description box. How herpes became a sexual boogeyman from Slate magazine. Mandatory read if you have herpes. These hit pieces were crazy. It's the worst thing ever. It's for life. It's like putting a soldering iron on your genitals. Anybody who came out and said it's not a big deal because they don't have very many symptoms was silenced. Basically a hit piece all around herpes. And this was even before the pharmaceutical companies came out. So before there even was antiviral treatment to profit off of a stigma, there was these hit pieces basically saying that I quote in the article, while type 1 infects indiscriminately, type 2 exercises moral judgment on the sexually promiscuous. Now this was long before they realized that type 1 can infect the genitals. But it was basically seen that type 1 is normal, type 2 is for immoral sexual deviance. Not much has changed. Fast forward, pharmaceutical company came along, profited off of the stigma, but didn't necessarily invent it or make it worse. And some of the advertisements for antivirals weren't even that bad. It was like, hey, because of antivirals, Sally has herpes, but her boyfriend doesn't have to, or something. It was actually pretty empowering. But with that being said, it shows us that these two viruses, being millions of years old, only really collected a lot of fear, I'd say 60, 50, 40 to 60 years ago. Now, I want to touch a little bit on why everybody is so afraid of herpes, even though the vast majority of people have herpes. And if that's confusing to you, it's because we are still so programmed and brainwashed that our language still messes us up. HSV1 stands for herpes simplex virus 1. As far as I know, the H in HSV1 stands for herpes. The H in HSV2 stands for herpes. Stigma aside, brainwashing aside, programming aside, your life aside, there's no reason why, if HSV2 is considered herpes, then HSV1 isn't also considered herpes. Other than we have been conditioned since we are born to associate words with meanings that don't even make any sense. Why this matters? I'd say globally, 50 to 70, somewhere in that ballpark of people on planet Earth have HSV1, okay? Throw away the programming. More people have herpes than don't. Type 2, there is probably some crossover. You can arguably say that somewhere between 50 and 80% of the world has either HSV1 or HSV2. The majority of the world has herpes. Now, the problem is that the stigma is most prevalent in Canada, UK, Australia, Ireland, USA. I think those are the places where I get the most amount of clients from. If you are looking for some help with your diagnosis, check the description box. There's a video, a 3-step process to get your life back on track, or a book a call button just down below if you want to hop on a call with me and see if I can help you. The stigma in all of those countries prevails, and it's because a lot of us have been completely disassociating the word herpes with cold sores or oral herpes or things that are non-sexual. We have been so programmed to believe that herpes equals STI and usually just HSV2, even though now we're seeing more cases of genital herpes B type 1. So we've been conditioned our whole life to think that herpes up here, which is super common and non-sexual, is normal, and whatever happens down here is 24/7 painful blisters. Your life is over. You're going to die. It's for life, but cold sores are temporary. This entire thing is like, if you're old enough to remember, when you have your iPhone or iPod cables and they're jumbled up. Imagine if like your iPhone cables were so wired headphones back in the day, so jumbled up, and they can never be unjumbled. Never be unjumbled. Untangled? You get the point. We're so brainwashed. Now, the problem is that the majority of people out there, this is mean, don't think. Like, I unthought, is that even a word? I unthought my way out of the fear, out of the stigma. And people nowadays, they need to do more thinking. And if you're watching this video, you're already in the right place. Like, you're taking the time to actually unthink the beliefs, process them, untangle the headphone cords, put them back in your ears, and listen to the truth. Because in reality, people are so afraid of herpes for many, many reasons. Lack of education or improper education. It's not tested on STI panels. We're not taught about this in school. We're continuing to call a cold sore just a cold sore and not oral herpes. You have a bunch of people out there who are raising their kids and reinforcing that there's a huge difference out there. There is a lack of education about the fact that type 1 can infect the genitals. There is a lack of disclosure when it comes to oral herpes. There's so much that I can't even begin to untangle the mess that this herpes situation is. And I made a video before, if I was the devil, all the things that I would do to make sure that herpes stigma stays alive. And it's all the things I'm illustrating here. Okay, and one more thing I want to talk about when it comes to the fear and stuff is that we have a bunch of people who do not know it's not included on STI panels in the majority of countries without having active symptoms. Then you have a population of people who have painful, noticeable, significant symptoms who go and get checked via a swab test or something. And when the people that are not aware, you can be asymptomatic, and the people that are not tested ask someone like me, how did you know that you had herpes? And I say, oh, hurts to pee, bumps developing down here, significant blisters. Their image of herpes is then, worst case scenario, lots of symptoms, must know if you have it. So we have a whole bunch of people out there who have minimal or no symptoms, truly believing that in order to have herpes, you have to have the worst case scenario. And it's this vicious circle of like symptomatic worst case scenarios being the image of herpes and a lack of information about the overarching idea of asymptomatic infections, minimal symptoms, lack of testing being probably a large proportion of the population when it comes to herpes. What else? Other last point on this is that people don't understand that they are risking herpes whenever they're intimate. So it isn't just that people are at risk of getting herpes from someone who tells them and discloses. It's that humans are fundamentally risking herpes, oral or genital, when they're active with other human beings if their status is unknown. The problem is, psychologically, and I don't have a solve for this, human beings are more risk averse when they know they're at risk than when they're just like, I hope you don't have herpes. I'm not going to think about it. And then they go. And some people never get herpes, but they're at risk. Some people get it and they're at risk. Some people, it's a big mess. Back to the video. And I know for a fact that I'm not going to be able to change the world, but what I can do is change your life and make you see things for how it truly is, not how it's been jumbled up to be. Now, the funny part about the HSV1 versus HSV2 cold sores versus herpes situation is that people are so afraid of the word herpes. Think about it. If I was to go up to you who frequently gets cold sores and say, oh, you have herpes, people would actually be like, no, I don't have that. What are you talking about? I'm not a disgusting, dirty slut. There is actually like visceral reactions and denial about something that you actually have due to a stigma. If that's not power and control, I don't know what is. And I'm getting so like passionate about this because it is actual insanity. Now, I'm not going to sit here on my high horse and say I didn't think these things before I got herpes, but it's like getting herpes opened my eyes to how programmed we all are. The only reason why somebody would, like, what's a good word, viciously deny that their cold sore is herpes is because they're afraid to associate with the word. And it's like, what does that word mean? What meaning are people putting on to having herpes? It should simply be an objective reality, a medical fact, a condition that we all basically are probably going to experience or encounter in our life. Some of us get it sexually, some of us get it non-sexually. It doesn't actually matter in a world where there isn't shame around sex. But obviously that's not going to go away. We're never going to get rid of a sexual shame or feelings towards that or taboos about our genitals. And that's okay. But as long as you acknowledge what it truly is about and realize that the majority of us are all pursuing the same act that we shame each other for, it's hypocritical. Humans beings are hypocritical, we're weird, we don't even make a lot of sense, and we're all just a bunch of advanced cavemen. Unfortunately, back in the day, the cavemen didn't even have shame. So we're actually more behind than we were when we were cavemen. Next topic. I find this one to be very funny. And I came up with a quote in my head. Because if you're watching this video and you speak English and you've been dealing with the herpes stigma, you're probably from one of these Western countries. And I was recently in Bali for 4 months. And I was thinking about this recently. In other parts of the world, parts of Europe, parts of Asia, maybe even South America, a lot of people there, they don't know that they're supposed to shame you for herpes. Now listen to that again. In other parts of the world, they actually don't know that they're supposed to shame you for herpes. They're supposed to shame us, allegedly. That's what life's been like in Canada and America and the UK and Australia and all these places. You're supposed to shame each other for herpes, and cold sores are normal. But you go somewhere else, hopefully, if you're able to exit your country for a day, a week, a month, you'll notice that other parts of the world either don't have any education about herpes, or they simply think that you're actually a human being with values and things to offer, and you're more than your diagnosis. When in reality, you go to America and, oh, you have herpes? You're just, get away from me, goodbye. And I found it funny because when I was talking to people in Bali or in Thailand or even other parts of Europe, they don't think herpes is a big deal at all, or they simply don't know what it is. And from that perspective, you can educate them about, oh, this is what it really is, this is how common it is, this is how it's passed. And oftentimes people say, so what's the big deal? And I've actually had to explain to people I've disclosed, like as a job, that my job only exists because there's a stigma. If you weren't watching this and you weren't ashamed of your diagnosis and you weren't looking for coaching or videos or support, I wouldn't be making these videos. So it's like my entire social media content is based around the lie that herpes is a big deal and that it's this fearful, worst case scenario, super rare thing. And it's like I'm actually operating within within the matrix, even if I'm outside of the matrix. I'm like, what's that word? I'm like commuting every day into the stigma to go to work, and then I commute out of the stigma to go home. And I'm like, I hope this is not offensive, but it's like, it's funny to me that a lot of people can't get themselves out of this. Like, actually, it's not funny, it's sad. But I find it funny the way the world is set up now, where there is this stigma that is so flimsy. And in my opinion, if enough people start questioning and calling it out and saying, like, this literally is bullshit, it's nonsense, it's cold sores, literally oral herpes. If you have type 1 down there, people call it herpes. So why is this not herpes? And it's like, all of these questions were never meant to be questioned, but I'm going to question them. So getting to the point of the video where I actually want to share with you how you can not let fear hold you back from your life. And the first thing you should do is get educated about herpes. So figure out transmission, prevalency, lack of testing. Use all of these facts to shape your perspective around herpes, and realize that, like, once you take yourself out of this, like, I guess it's like a hole of lack of knowledge, a pit of despair where you're afraid because you don't know how it works, you can start to empower yourself with beliefs about, okay, wait, I'm part of the majority of people with herpes. Like, most people have herpes on Earth, oral or genital. This could be transmitted to someone's genitals. If you have it down there, it could transmit it to someone's genitals. So genital herpes is a risk from every person who has HSV 1 or 2 to people who don't, okay? So shouldn't disclosure be happening regardless of type? You then have lack of testing. Use the perspective about lack of testing to reframe when you're disclosing. When you disclose and you meet someone who's actually curious about you and curious about herpes, they might actually want to go get tested themselves. And this is going to benefit them to get tested themselves. You don't have to use a condom. You can not worry about transmission. You can be more knowledgeable about herpes in general and actually bring you two together. So you aren't missing out on someone who isn't interested in learning more about the perspective on herpes. I can't even speak English. You aren't missing out on someone who doesn't want to learn more and shift their perspective on herpes. So you should never be concerned about an ignorant person, judgmental person, a crazy person. Because when you realize and when you reframe your mindset with what I'm telling you in this video, and the knowledge about herpes, and the confidence, and the detachment from the stigma, everybody else who's still buying into this and is still so afraid then is irrational. So you can actually watch this video and watch the other videos and go from, I'm afraid, this makes sense, to there's no reason to be afraid. That's what you want to do. If you do want some help, book a call down below. Because then you're basically bulletproof. Now, you and I cannot get rid of the ignorant people, and we can't change the entire world, and we can't shift everyone's perspective, and that's okay. But learning to like navigate around the ignorance and navigate around the stigma and realize that there's so many people out there who are educated, not afraid of herpes, already dated someone that has it, maybe has it themselves, and are just willing to date you. You don't have to fear anyone out there who does have this crazy, closed-minded perspective. So once you have the knowledge about herpes, my suggestion is use that knowledge to reframe how you view yourself, change all of your disempowering beliefs to empowering beliefs. Don't let the fear that everyone else is perpetuating influence you. Detach from things, and then when you think about disclosure, hopefully after you built your confidence up and you're educated, you frame it as a mutual conversation about sexual health. And with the knowledge that you have, prevalency-wise and transmission-wise and lack of testing-wise, you can feel empowered to frame your disclosure as a mutual conversation about sexual health. Hey, before things get physical, let's talk about sexual health. It's important to me. I'm positive for HSV1 or HSV2. Like, let me know if you have any questions of what that means for us. And if you find someone out there who's like, oh my God, herpes, that's the worst thing ever. Unless you are still attached to that fear that they have, their reaction is going to seem insane. So the key here is that, like, if you feel deeply afraid of herpes and you try and date and you meet someone who's deeply afraid of herpes, you're both going to just like agree and you're never going to have success. But if you do the initial work, I can help you if you want, to detach, to get educated, to build back your confidence, to frame disclosure well, and to not be afraid of this person's reaction, then you're just going to be dating until you find someone who has a functioning brain. Now, it's not to say that everyone out there is like a bad person or wrong if they buy into the herpes stigma, because a little bit of stigma, a little bit of fear is good. But people are more afraid of herpes than they are about like anything. Anything. Like herpes is everyone's number one fear. They're like, yeah, I'd rather get in a car accident and die than get herpes. And it's like, that's crazy. And it's like that person could even get cold sores and not even have any idea. So there's just so much craziness out there. At the end of the day, if any part of this video really resonated, leave a comment down below. You don't have to be afraid of herpes, and I think that it doesn't make sense to be afraid long term unless you still perpetuate your own shame, your own lack of knowledge onto yourself. So the sooner that you get a handle on changing your perspective and getting rid of the fear, the more you can move forward and just date confidently. If you do want some help, there's a 3-step process video linked in the description. It's going to walk you through getting educated, getting your confidence back, and framing disclosure as a mutual conversation. If you want some extra help, book a call with me. Let's get you back to the life you deserve.